I named the book the way I named it on purpose. The world is programmed. That means to me that it's sort of a detached methodology. There's something happening in the world which is bringing us situations that are helping us to grow, helping us to adapt to each other and to figure out the next level of how do we show up in the world, getting better at what we do. And I think it's built to sort of bring us situations that challenge us in that way. And that's a really good thing.
Hello, and welcome to the Onward Podcast. I'm Emily Harmon, your host. Just a little bit about me. I am a retired Navy executive as well as a retired naval officer. I worked for the Navy for 38 years when you include my 4 years at the Naval Academy. And in 2019, I retired. I called my retirement a graduation. I loved my life when I was working for the Navy, for the most part. And I can tell you that since I've graduated, I've really created a life I love living. I have found my purpose. I love hosting this Onward podcast, helping people spread the word and share their stories about facing adversity and moving forward and discovering themselves along the way. And I also love being a personal coach. I help people create a life that they love living. Too often we think, oh, I'd love that, but I can't have it. But what if you could? What if you could? It's definitely a question worth asking yourself and worth exploring the answer. Now, let's go to the interview. I want to introduce my guest. Sky Nelson is no stranger to the Onward podcast. I put a link to all of the other episodes he's been on, and I just love interviewing him. Sky recently, back in February, I think it was, published his newest book. His newest book is entitled Leap to Wholeness: How the World is Programmed to Help Us Grow, Heal, and Adapt. He's a physics educator building a foundation for scientific understanding of synchronicity in our modern world. So often we feel we have to say or do something to fix the problems around us. We perceive the world through filters, our thoughts, opinions, feelings, and beliefs. And we form a story based on the information we perceive. If our stories aren't accurate, our solutions might miss the mark. Sky relies on a mix of modalities, science and self-inquiry, to learn from life. Sky is a parent, husband, author, speaker, and trainer, as well as a physicist, educator, musician, an award-winning composer and performer, and a software engineer. He's a professionally trained musician and songwriter. Check out his music on Spotify. His musical composition and performances can also be found at skynelson.com. Note that you'll hear me referring to other people in this interview because this interview was conducted live and broadcast on LinkedIn, YouTube, and on Facebook. So when I go live, listeners can comment and ask questions of the guest. Sky, we are live, and welcome to the Onward Podcast.
Thanks so much. It's great to be here, Emily.
Yeah, you can tell I like interviewing you, right? This is like the fourth time, I think. Because you were one of my, the one that we did on the coronavirus, and then there's a couple other times I've interviewed you. And a lot of the people in the Onward movement like what you have to say too. And now this year, for this episode, you have a new book coming out, and interviewing you is a great way to end my day because actually I had a kind of a tough homeowners association, and then I had to go to the dentist. So this is a really good ending to my day because I hate going to the dentist.
That's great. I'm so glad. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I love your mission with the Onward movement. And so let's dive into it. That's great.
Your book, I'm going to put the banner up here, is called Leap to Wholeness. And it's got a subtitle. Yep.
There you go.
Wholeness. I can't wait for mine to come in the mail tomorrow. It's supposed to, I think.
How the world is programmed to help us grow, heal, and adapt.
Yeah. So the world is programmed to help us grow, heal, and adapt. That's something that's... So I'm going to we talked about this, Guy. We're just going to assume that people haven't read your other books and heard your talk about synchronicity. So why don't you introduce this topic to us?
So I research fundamental physics. And in the past couple of years, I've been on a project trying to evaluate some aspects of the field of quantum foundations of quantum mechanics. But what it really is a study of time. So I'm researching how time, how time fits in our physical theories. And that's really important to everybody because time is something we are all familiar with. We're immersed in time. We experience time all the time. So it's hard to even separate ourselves from it, which is part of why it's so interesting to study.
True, because we never have enough time. Are you going to be able to make more time?
Exactly.
Make us feel like that?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's a time, okay?
And I think we all have a certain relationship with time, how we relate to time management, whether we feel we're getting older or time is something we don't have any kind of negotiating power with. And yet, what I've found is in a number of theories out there, not just the work that I'm doing, but that there's a flexibility to time. The essence of the work that I do is trying to understand how events happen in our lives. Why do certain events happen at certain times? And trying to develop a sense of meaningfulness about events in our lives. Because in physics, generally speaking, and in the modern way of looking at sort of reductionist way of looking at the world where you can divide everything up into pieces and study it, we think that that's all there is, that there's no meaning, there's no emergent like anything other than what you can get from dividing it up and looking at the pieces. And my experience is that really the only thing that actually impacts us is the meaning of situations. So when you have a meaningful circumstance in your life, meeting somebody that's important to your life for the first time, or even just showing up at a restaurant and bumping into a friend, or reading a book that really moves you, like a passage in a book that you find and it changes your life in some way or solves a problem that you're facing. These are all, it's a bunch of text on the page, but it's only important because it means something to you. So I'm interested in how certain configurations of the world are more meaningful than others, how this configuration of letters on the page actually changes your life in some way or solve some problem, and how did you run across that passage of text when you're dealing with this particular problem in your life? Let's say you're dealing with you're a manager in a company and you're trying to navigate a situation where you have to maybe let someone go at work and it's hard. You're struggling with it or give some difficult feedback. And then you pick up a book or maybe you go to the movies with your family that weekend. Something happens where you experience some new information, like the theme of the movie reflects what you're going through. And what I've found and is sort of the theory is that those kinds of situations are likely to show up in our lives and they're reflecting what we're going through on the inside. So there's this connection between the inner world and the outer world that I think is really important to understand. And that's what we call synchronicity.
Not a coincidence.
Well, not a random coincidence, right?
Not a random coincidence. That's what you call synchronicity.
That's like a meaningful coincidence.
A meaningful coincidence.
Carl Jung was the initial he coined that term initially. Synchronicity means falling together in time. Chron means time, and syn means with together in time. We can get, I think, better at seeing how the choices we make in time, and that's really the curiosity I have. How do the choices we make influence our future experiences? We're confronted with some challenge, and we make a choice in response to that challenge, and then we have some following set of circumstances that happen, consequences, and I don't feel like we always know the right connection between those situations. Like we don't always see how our choices influence the response we get from the world. And I can point to lots of experiences with like my daughter where I think I'm saying something that's helpful and it turns out to be like the opposite of helpful.
Yeah. So what is it that you do? Like, how do you go about and study that? What does that look like?
Well, there are technical things in physics, the theory of evolution of the wave function. The wave function is this mathematical thing that describes each part of the world, an electron or an atom. And we have these equations that tell us how it changes in time. But here's the thing. All of those equations tell us how it changes in time. We assume that time exists, and then we look at how does the wave function change with respect to that thing. So the task that I have is to look at that. I'm questioning the question itself. Instead of looking at how it changes in time, I'm saying we don't even know what time it is. Time is this thing we're trying to step outside of time. And then how can we describe this wave function without referring to time? And that's a really big conceptual challenge. So the nice thing is that it's a lot of conceptual unraveling of things. It's not a lot of experimental stuff.
Right.
But when we have a new concept of time, I think a lot of things fall into place in a nice way. in the physical world. And I did just publish a paper in December called Space-Time Paths as a Whole, which looks at this. And it also seems to point to this idea that synchronicity is a possibility, although I can't prove that. That's a postulate or a proposal.
Laura says, what's your dash? The date you were born and the date you died aren't what really matter. It's the dash, the years in between.
Yeah, like I hear her saying the dash, like running for that finish line or running for all those milestones, what you're doing in between.
Yeah.
So where we go from this, if there is meaning to circumstances, if things show up in our life at the right time for a reason, I think that reason is a reflection of whatever we're putting out there. So it's not like it's happening to us, but there's a co-relationship that we have an intention and an action, and then there's a response that we get from life, situations that show up in our life.
That's what you're saying is how the world is programmed to help us grow and to help us heal and to help us adapt.
So here's the way I see time that's unique that we can think about. Most of us tend to just think of time as moving forward, step by step. And that's what the Greeks called chronos time, the chronological time. And you can always look at time that way. It's not wrong. But there's another way to look at it. The Greeks also had a term called Kairos. And I can't say that this is exactly what Kairos is, but from my research, what we find is that the path of something isn't just a bunch of slices of moments in time, put one after the other. There's a wholeness to our path through time. So we should picture our experience of time not as just what's happening right now, but as like a film strip from our past to our future. We think of our lives as going somewhere, and think about what that final frame is on where we're going. Not necessarily the end point of our life, but even just the end point of the day. What does the final frame look like at the end of the day? And if there's a lot of possible endpoints, I could spend more time working on family stuff, or I could spend more time working on organizing my house, or I could spend more time working on business or taxes, or all these different things I could choose. And I'm looking at, well, let's think of time. I'm connected to each of those outcomes. Like I'm on this film strip right now that goes there.
Right.
So which of those am I going to invest in? And when I do invest in one of them, I tend to get feedback or opportunities from life sort of helping me along that path.
Yeah.
Responsiveness.
I think we can all relate to that. I think we can all think of times in our lives when we've noticed that happening. But what you talk about filters. What are our filters and how do they limit us?
Well, filters are really the key point in this new book. The first book, Living in Flow, talks about how synchronicities seem to happen. We decide what we're aiming for, those apples on the tree or those final frames of the film strip. What do we want life to look like at the end of the day, at the end of the week, the end of the month? And we aim towards that. Mm-hmm. But then I started looking at, well, what stops us from doing that? Or how do we aim? It's not as simple as just saying, I'm going to aim to be more successful in my business. It's like, what is the target? And how do we shift what's going on inside of ourselves to make choices that align with the targets that we want? I think it's one thing to have a statement of your target and intention, and it's another thing to know how to make choices which lead there. So the filters are the things in physics. A filter is anything like a lens in your eye or in your glasses. It changes the information coming through it.
Yep.
So it's like there's this information out there in the world, people talking to you. You go to work and your colleague gives you some feedback. That's information. But what you're able to hear from that information is different from the raw information. If you have a history, like an experience before where somebody has criticized you in a certain way, and it makes you hear everything through that lens, it's going to be hard to hear what they're saying objectively. And you might not even, I got feedback once that people on another team in my department, in a different department, felt like I was always bringing up problems. And that was my job. I was a quality tester. So I was supposed to bring up problems, but they felt that there was something in the way I was doing it that felt not constructive to the conversation. And I couldn't hear that at first because I thought that was my job. So it took some time for me to change that filter, how I was interpreting that information, to see, but there's also this other aspect of they're looking for a partner to help them solve problems. And when I approach it a certain way, it's the same information I'm presenting, but I can do it in a different way, and I can have a different partnership feeling. So they're getting a different feeling from my conversation. And that took some time for me to let go of the original filter and take on a new perspective. So a filter is like a perspective.
Yeah. So how do they limit us? They limit us by not being able to see, like in your example, your filter was maybe limiting your ability to work in a collaborative way with your team members.
Yeah, and one of the challenges I face, I would say I'm an intellectual, even though I play music and I'm very social, but ultimately I'm more comfortable in my head. I spent a lot of time, practicing being more in my body or feeling things and connecting with people, but it takes work for me, and I'm a little bit overly analytical. It took me some time to realize that, and so I have to sort of work on shifting those filters and understanding what is somebody else feeling. What am I feeling? And that's the real practice, is understanding in the moment, what are we feeling? A lot of times filters are feelings that we have. So if I feel threatened by something that somebody tells me, it's going to be harder to hear what they're saying. And here's the key idea too. I might not see an opportunity that's there because there's a synchronicity in what they're saying. Like, hey, you should try this new route to solving your problem. But I can't hear it because all I hear is the criticism.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. And actually, I'm in my head a lot too. So it took me some slowing down to actually feel. And so sometimes I think a lot of us, sometimes we're just so busy, we don't even notice what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And we
Yeah.
don't pay attention to that. And then that's a filter too, right? We
Yeah.
miss out on a lot of things because of that.
Yeah.
But
So I named the book the way I named it on purpose. The world is programmed. That means to me that it's sort of a detached methodology. There's something happening in the world which is bringing us situations that are helping us to grow,
mhm,
helping us to adapt to each other and to figure out the next level of how do we show up in the world, getting better at what we do. And I think it's built to sort of bring us situations that challenge us in that way. And that's a really good thing. And we can learn how to let go of those filters little by little. And that's what I call healing. It's not a touchy-feely thing. It's like when you realize that you're seeing the world a certain way, and then you see another way to see the world, it can blow your mind. It's what I call the feeling of awe. Like, oh my gosh, there's so much more to life that I couldn't see it before.
yeah, that's a good point. So I don't know. We might have trouble getting through all of the comments. So we don't have to really.
Well, I will say the movie Contact is a wonderful movie. If you haven't seen that, people.
No, I haven't
She's,
seen.
okay, so she goes to space and she has 13 hours of experiences with these alien beings who are teaching her and all of human civilization how to get along together. There's this great quote, which I think is actually in my book from that movie. It's funny that you brought that up, Laura. It's from the main character, and they say to her, after all these our years of exploring, there's only one thing that's made the vast emptiness of space bearable, and that's each other. So I really talk about how these filters we have keep us feeling isolated and how to start to see those filters. It's like taking off your glasses and looking at the lenses directly. And when you see them, you can begin to detach from them and make different choices and start to feel more connected to people and less isolated.
Steven says, I find that feelings come when you have access or maybe excess brain capacity that you can have more empathy. So when you're not as tired and less caffeine. Okay. And
Yeah,
Laura
I can
says,
resonate with that.
that's true. And Laura says, most fascinating conversation I've had all day. Laura, you should be here interviewing uh, Sky.
So I have
So
a section that speaks to that in the book.
yeah,
Shall I read it?
yeah, read it.
Okay. This is in the section called Awe and Wonder. And it's a chapter of the book called A Virtual Like Reality. Let me explain what I mean by that. The way we talked about time implies that in a way, the world is virtual like. In other words, we've measured experimentally that there's some ambiguity about the way the world is. Like it doesn't actually exist until we interact with it. It doesn't exist in a definite form until we interact with it. There's some uncertainty to what reality is before we show up. And it's kind of like a virtual world that is appearing when we look at it. Kind of like your computer, if you ever watch a movie or play a game, it wasn't there 5 minutes ago until you turned on the screen. And now it's there. And there's a whole history to it as if it had been there. But the movie just showed up on your screen, and the life of those people in that movie just sort of began right from the middle.
Yeah.
So it's virtual. And there's a sense in which things that happen in our life are also virtual. You run into someone at the market, and all you know is that that's where they are. They were at the market. You don't know where they were before. So it's virtual in that sense, which is maybe deeper than we can go at the moment. But I like the idea that there's some flexibility to time and to the things that we can experience. That physical reality is kind of malleable in this way. So here we go. The state I'm describing of letting go of these filters is nothing other than the flow state, the topic of my previous book. What makes this state possible is the removal of our filters. Awe happens when we remove a filter. We walk through the world with filters that we call me. And when one of these is removed, we experience awe because we suddenly don't recognize ourselves. When a filter changes, the world looks very different. We lose our bearing. It opens up new possibilities that we hadn't been aware of. So try the following exercise if you want to see that filters lay at the foundation of the experience of flow. Imagine being at a grocery store on Friday afternoon after a long work week. You have to navigate long lines, get your groceries to the car, and then make it home through traffic. Unpleasant, right?
Yeah.
But why? Well, because not only do you have to do all these time consuming things, but they're getting in the way of what really matters to you. When I see long lines at the checkout, I immediately imagine how badly I want to be home so that I can sit down with my family and relax. Here's the test. Now imagine that you just received notification that you got a new job, okay? Or a promotion, or an A in a hard class, or maybe a friendly text message from your crush, or any other positive scenario that pulls you out of the moment. I bet you can now easily tolerate the inconvenient lines and frustrating traffic with a smile on your face. Can you relate to that?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Suddenly, none of that matters. These things change your experience because they address a deeper underlying problem in your life. They open you up to awe and wonder. When a deeper underlying problem could be any of the things that are really you're struggling with, whether it's a relationship or trying to pass a class or trying to get a new job. So when these things solve that problem, they open you up to awe and wonder. Typically, you might not even be aware of what is really stressing you out. You might have underlying angst around your crush or your job. And this angst filters out the joy from everyday situations. But when that filter is removed, even just temporarily, you're likely to endure the line with a smile on your face. You're happy to be alive.
And that filter was removed by like a new piece of news coming in, maybe like a text. You got an A on your test or something. But
Yeah.
can we purposefully remove our filters?
So let's look at that. It's a great question. If in that moment, what removed the filter? Well, something much more important happened. So the filter of me being frustrated with the line at the grocery store is really a lens that I'm looking through that sort of says, oh, everything's kind of hard. I've got all these problems I've got to deal with. I don't have enough time to deal with them. I'm not sure if I'm going to be successful or not. It's a lot of uncertainty. This is my experience. A lot of dealing with uncertainty, dealing with just the not knowing that creates angst. And and these are sort of driven by the big problems in our lives, right? Like at the bottom of that pile of worry is sort of like, and my relationship is really just not working right now, and I'm really uncertain about my job prospects. When one of those major foundational pieces gets resolved, all of the other things that are sitting on top of it don't matter anymore. They're getting the power from the basic thing that you're really upset about. If we can get really in touch with the things we're really upset about, like the core things, and focus on what it really feels like to feel, yeah, I feel anxious about my job in the long term. Like that's just a big thing. And all the other things that are happening, like my daughter sort of not eating her dinner or whatever it might be, they actually don't matter. And I can disconnect them and stay connected to the feeling that I feel in my body around the big thing. That might be a sense of uncomfortableness in my chest, like my gut might, like my belly might be kind of tight. If I really allow myself to feel those things I'm really feeling angst about, it's not comfortable. But it means we stop projecting that uncomfortableness onto these other things like the line at the grocery store.
Yeah. Or snapping at your wife when you get home, or just different things like that. Yeah. But it requires being in tune and in touch with your feelings. And I think a lot of people tune out their feelings. I know when I was working at my last job, I felt like I was so busy. I kind of tuned out my feelings. And sometimes people come home and have a glass of wine every night, to tune out their feelings or whatever. So I think it is important to notice what we're noticing and to be in touch with what we're feeling. So how can this apply to like this whole political environment and the polarization that we have?
Well, filters make it hard to know what's true, right? Because we see a lot of information, and what we allow into our minds is what makes sense to us. And that's a lot of times based on our own context, like where we come from, what we're doing, what's making us nervous, what's making us worried. So if we're worried about our financial picture and somebody comes to us with a pointing blame at some group of people about the financial meltdown, it's very compelling to then feel angry and then say, yeah, you're right, without necessarily doing research to find out if that's actually the cause. So I think we need to do a better job of really deciding, separating our own what's driving us? What are the emotions that are driving us right now? And I'm not going to take in information from outside, and I'm going to separate that information from what's driving me, and being able to see the difference between what I'm feeling and what's going on in the world out there. I've got a quote here from Aristotle that I think speaks to this pretty well. And I love this quote. He said, "Anybody can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person and to the right amount and at the right time and for the right purpose and in the right way, this is not within everybody's power and is not easy. So that to do these things properly is rare, praiseworthy, and noble." So I think a lot of what we see is people like you and I not necessarily directing our emotions, whether it's anger or something else, to where it belongs.
Yeah.
Angry at the government for something, but that's actually a situation that's out of the government's control, and it's hard to see that. Here's a dialogue that speaks to the types of choices we make with our filters.
Okay.
And I don't know how many folks out there are parents, but this is something I'm familiar with. This kind of reflects a dialogue I might have with my own kid. Version A, child says, "I'm feeling nervous about my math test." Parent says, "When is it?" Child says, "Tomorrow." The parent, with an edge in the voice, says, "Well, have you studied?" Child, a little exasperated, says, "Yes, Dad, I studied, but my math teacher just gave us a review sheet today." Parent, firmly, "Okay, please go get your review sheet now and we'll go over it together." Child, indignant, "But I am in the middle of my spelling homework. I have to do this too." Parent, "Come on, your math test is important and you've spent the whole afternoon on this other stuff. I didn't realize you had a math test. Let's get to it." Child, fine, stomps off to get the review sheet.
Did I write that part of your book?
Does this sound familiar?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's an example of the escalation of the parent has something going on inside that's not apparent to the kid. The kid doesn't realize the parent's feeling something about like some tension and anxiety about the kid's test. But it comes out in the statements like firmly, "Please go get your review sheet now and we'll go over it." Or, "You've been spent the whole afternoon on this other stuff." When we have an attachment to a specific outcome and we don't address it in the right way or to the right person, it causes the person we're talking to feel like confused.
Yeah.
"Why are you suddenly so upset about this math test? Like, it's going to be okay."
Well, the parent too might have something planned later that night, right?
Mhm.
So now they've got to squeeze this in, or they feel like they have to because they didn't know about it, and
Right.
they are attached to an outcome of the kid getting an A on the test. I don't
Right.
know, just throwing it out,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
and they're not communicating that there's all these other plans tonight, so we don't have this is taking up that time, but the kid doesn't know that and
Right.
doesn't understand why the parent's so stressed.
Right. And so what happens is this unspoken tension that builds, and it can build on itself over time too, over weeks and months,
Yeah.
become part of our dynamic with our parents or our kids. It's very humbling for me and heart opening. So that's why I like writing about it, because it just speaks so clearly to some of these issues.
Hmm.
And I find I can take the things I learn as a parent or as a husband and see the direct application in my business world or my other community relationships, because it's all about how we show up and how we humble ourselves and how we react or don't react, whether we're able to be honest with the person we're talking to. And here's an example of an alternate conversation where the parent is able to manage their own reaction in a different way and avoid the escalation. Child, "I'm feeling nervous about my math test." Parent, "When is it?" Child, "Tomorrow." Parent, gently this time, "Is there something I can do to help?" Child, calmly, "No, I just need to go over it again. The teacher just gave us the review sheet today, but I have to finish my spelling test first. Maybe you could help quiz me on that." Parent, curiously, "Sure, you want me to just read you the words?" Child, confidently, "Yeah, thanks." So this time the parent, first of all, asks, what can I do to help? And that implies, here's where we come back to filters. Here's where we come back to filters. The implication of the parent's question, "Is there something I can do to help?" is also saying, "I trust you to handle this, and you might need help in handling it. You be in charge and tell me what to do." There's an implicit respect that wasn't there the first time.
Yeah.
This is what I'm talking about when I talk about filters. What's being said that's not actually spoken in the words, but
Uh-huh.
gets conveyed to the person and goes through their filtering system and then affects their behavior.
Well, there's a lot of filtering, it seems, too, when it comes down to the Black Lives Matter movement. What we hear with that, what we hear when we hear you're a white male with privilege, What would you have to say about that? And how has your understanding of your privilege as a white man changed over time? And how are these filters, how do those apply to some of that discussion?
Well, I think it's really important as a white person and as a man, both of those roles, for me to speak about this and it's hard to do for anybody. And I think it's important to bring it up and talk about it. I've learned a lot about the history of privilege over the past few hundred years. And, I am in a role where I have a lot of options that other people don't have, or I have support from a system that works to make things easier for me than it is for other people. So let me just say right off the bat, if I say something that offends somebody, please forgive me. And that's part of the dialogue. I hope you can respond to me. In the miscommunication around the filters and what filters we have, I think is illustrated by the conversation around Black Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter. It's true that Blue Lives Matter, and it's true that Black Lives Matter. And that's not really what's trying to be said. The Black Lives Matter movement is not trying to say that blue lives don't matter. It's trying to address a specific issue of systemic, ongoing, historical bias. So the statement that blue lives matter is actually not hearing what's being said in the Black Lives Matter manifesto. It's actually not hearing that accurately, coming back with its own statement of here's what we need to have acknowledged. And I think both of those perspectives need to be acknowledged. They need to feel like the other perspectives acknowledge what's important to them. And when we just come back with these two phrases that are counter to each other, it doesn't give us space to acknowledge what the other side is experiencing and to honor that. And I think it's essential and possible to honor alternate perspectives without agreeing with them. Mm-hmm. And that's how we start to pull back these filters, which limit what we can actually hear, make it harder to even understand what's going on.
I think the filters come up maybe even more so when you're in an argument or when you're really passionate about something. Would you say that?
Yeah, and I'm reading Dr. Laura's comment. I'm privileged as a white woman. I can go into a store to buy makeup or a Band-Aid as the color of my skin. 20 years ago, I learned that. It never dawned on me. Some things are changing, yet is not resolved. Yeah, and it's really important to understand that these issues are systemic, so we're all part of them. It's not like we can be racist or not racist. There's a term that Ibram X. Kendi uses, anti-racist. He essentially says that everything we do, every action we take, and every policy is really about policy, is either racist or anti-racist. There's no such thing as not racist because we're participating in a system that has certain policies. And racism isn't about the person and their behavior or who they are. None of us are racist. None of us are not racist. We're all taking actions that are participating in a racist set of policies or an anti-racist set of policies. And that's how we contribute to bettering the world, in my opinion, is through anti-racist actions and policies. And that means lifting up people who are marginalized and looking for equity in the actions we take individually and through policy.
Stephen said, how would I know if I come from white privilege?
Well, that's a good question. I don't think it's about coming from white privilege. As a white person, I experience white privilege. I know, one of my favorite physicists, of course, I say that and then I can't remember his name, the guy who runs the Hayden Planetarium, is a Black man and a really awesome physicist. But he tells a story of being stopped by police just because he's driving a nice car. And it's not a surprise to him. This is how his life has been, and Black people experience this a lot. So as a white person, I tell a story in the book actually of forgetting my wallet one day when I left the house to go to an event and being like, okay, I'll be fine. And then getting pulled over for using my cell phone. And the cop comes up and I don't have my wallet. And my main concern is that I'm going to get a ticket. But I realized in that moment that for a person of color, their main concern might be a lot more serious. They don't have a wallet. They're going to get pulled out of the car. All I got was a person saying, okay, you need to show proof of having a license, show that by mail, send it in. And I expected that to go the way it went, and it was fine. I don't sit there, I don't live with the fear of a worst case scenario. And that's not true for people who don't have white skin in a lot of cases. So I think we just live within a system that does this and works this way. And what we can do is begin to understand that and not take personal blame for it, but take responsibility for having a role in policymaking.
Okay, so this is where people can get your book, leaptowholenessbook.com. And so how does your book suggest we use synchronicity to relate to our problems and to experience a more purpose-filled life?
I see synchronicity as everywhere. It's not something I try and connect to sometimes. It's really a question of how do all the things in my life sort of fit together? How do all the pieces of the puzzle fit together? And, in the last book, I laid out a process called the Lorax process, where
Yeah.
you listen to the experiences you're having, open your mind to them, reflect on them. So you say maybe to every experience instead of no or instead of yes. You take time to sort of see, does this fit me? And then you release your attachments. If you had some kind of idea of where you thought you were going to do tonight, and another opportunity comes up, maybe you need to let go of what you planned. And then from there, you can take action. And this is about balancing our control mindset, where we take action, we're assertive, with a receptive mindset, where we're actually aligning with what else is going on around us. So, really, what I'm saying is we can become better listeners. We can become better listeners to each other, become better listeners to life experiences themselves. If we notice that we're getting riled up about something, well, first of all, that's a good practice. Notice when you're getting riled up. That's a big first step, or maybe not even first. Maybe that's like pretty far down the road.
Yeah.
Noticing our feelings in the moment as they're happening is really a challenge.
Right.
And if we notice that we're getting riled up, that's a clue that we can start listening more to the situation. I'm known for being attached to, like, once I get an idea of where we're going to go to dinner, it's like hard to switch. Someone says, I want to see this movie. And I'm like, no, I don't want to see that. And then I look it up the review and it's really good. And I'm like, yeah, I want to see that. And then they change their mind and they say, no, I actually want to see this other movie. But now I'm attached to what they just got me attached to. Like, that's how my mind works. I'm always attached to the next thing. And so letting go of that, again, it's about our preferences. It's about what we're thinking about what's going to be good for us. And when we can open up more to what's actually happening, what are the opportunities that are really here? Synchronicity is what shows up. It's the opportunity that you didn't think was going to go anywhere that is like really surprising and actually gives you the experience of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Laura. Start noticing your reactions and ask yourself why. Yeah. I mean, that's a lifelong practice.
Yeah.
Noticing
Definitely.
our reactions and having responses like Aristotle was saying, being angry at the right person at the right time. If I'm nervous about what's going on at work, and I'm able to separate that from coming home and being with my family, then I'm going to have a much nicer family experience. And what I mean is, like, I'm going to actually be vulnerable with my kid. This is a practice of mine. Like, when I was young, I don't think my parents shared with me when they were kind of nervous about work. They
Mhm.
just kind of shut down a little bit. But I share with my daughter so that I don't project onto her. I share, I'm nervous about work and it's not your problem. But I want you to know that when I am grouchy with you, it's not because of you, it's because I'm feeling this other thing. And what's amazing is she's completely able to handle that.
How old is your daughter? Like 12, I think.
She's 11, yeah. So she's sophisticated enough. I think all human beings are. And this is what's deceptive. We're sophisticated enough to, when someone is honest about their feelings, we give them a lot of space and we don't take it personally. But we're trained to not be honest about our feelings. So then we do things that are like deceptive and like roadblock people. And that we take personally.
Well, plus you're also showing her that you're human and that it doesn't matter, that even when you become an adult, you can get worried about something, right?
Yeah.
Adults don't have it all together, and she shouldn't expect that one day she'll have it all together.
Right.
And you're demonstrating to her how you handle that stress, and she'll be a better parent for it when she's a parent.
Yeah. I'm just reading some of the comments here. These are great. Yes, I think I like being able to set the example. I can't tell her to do these things. I just have to do them myself. And then hopefully she'll learn in her body how to do it.
They do. They pick up on it. So,
Dr. Laura says, all men are created equal, with the question mark. Women had to earn the right to vote, segregation of water fountains, bathrooms, and yet there's been a Black president, not a woman. What about a Black woman? Yes, I didn't create the problem and I can be part of the solution. Yeah, and that's why I hear you talking about also inequality between men and women. And that's why I stated separately that I'm white and I'm a man. Those are both roles that I play, that there's a power differential in the structure of society. And I take it very seriously. It's important to me that we are explicitly breaking those patterns. I try to do it in my language. We have a habit of saying guys, when we speak to a group of people. And I think that's, I don't like that habit. I want to break out of that and say maybe y'all. Thank you for bringing that up, Dr. Laura. And I really think that's important. We don't want to put our problems on our kids. That's what I hear in that statement, if that's what you mean. We don't want to layer them with burdens, but actually, I think that this is the paradox. When we don't share, people still feel because of their filters and our filters. We might not say the same "I love you" to our kid when we put them to bed at night, or might not read this bedtime story the same way because we've got a filter that's like me looking at the world through this negative lens because I'm thinking about work. I can't help it. It's just everything I do, she can feel that I'm different. So I'm better off. I'm going to convey the message I want of affection better if I just tell her what's going on for me without making it about her. And I think this is the really important thing, that people can really handle emotions. We're just, and everybody has emotions, right? Loving football is an emotion. Loving sports, playing sports, loving to watch TV, all these things we love to do are just the things we like. That's our feeling about the world. So I think it's befriending these things that we call emotions. It's not about becoming emotional in the wrong places, not about expressing tears at the wrong time, or when it gets in the way of a meeting or something like that. Like, there's appropriate ways to manage these things. But I think we are getting better and will continue to get better at letting people be themselves so that we can actually solve problems to the full extent rather than sort of pushing them down, the ones that are uncomfortable to deal with.
Yeah, I can see how all these filters just lead to so much miscommunication and so many problems that we have in this world.
I love telling people, I need to talk to you, sit down with the person and tell them what I respect about them and how amazing they are, when it's more likely that they're thinking, what did I do now? This is actually how the book concept developed for me. I noticed and have noticed how much anxiety that I carry around. Like when I hear something happen across the house and I jump out of my seat and run to see like what happened. Like if something falls, like, is everybody okay? Or, when I hear my wife on the phone and I hear her say, I don't know who she's talking to and I don't know what it's about, but I get anxious. Like, is this a bad thing that's going to affect everything? And really wanting to let go of those worries that I have that are not really explainable. And I find that I rest on kind of a bedrock of like something's going to go wrong. So I'm trying to shift my own bedrock, my own bottom line, like assumptions about the world, that things are okay. And there are still major problems to deal with. But at the fundamental level, I'm okay. And I can work from that place. So you asked about synchronicity. And if we really see synchronicity as showing up in our lives at the right time, then I think it can give us a sense of security that makes us feel more like, okay, everything's copacetic. How can I help?
That's a good way to end it. So this is, let's see, find this banner. This is the name of the book, Leap to Wholeness, and you can get it here at leaptowholenessbook.com. And if you want to hear, Sky's been on my podcast a couple of times. So if you want to hear some of his other episodes, they're all good. You can go to my website, just emilyharmon.com/onward podcast. And then there's a place where you can search. You can just search on Sky and the 3 other episodes that he's in will come up. So,
and I have some free events to celebrate the book launch that you're welcome to sign up for if you go to that website.
Okay. Leap to Wholeness, you have some free events. Okay. Mm-hmm. And if you read the book, you'll see that I wrote a little piece of it.
Yeah.
Right?
You contributed a story. I should have found it and read it.
Oh, that's
we'll put the page number in the show notes.
Yeah, we can. I wrote a little example, I think it was, of how a synchronicity happened in my life or something.
Yeah. And the stories that were contributed this time around were stories of adversity, which is exactly the kind of work that you do. How does synchronicity show up to help us through difficult times?
Yeah. So I can't wait to get my book, Sky. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Emily. Thanks to everybody who joined. It's really nice to talk to you.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching and contributing and commenting. We appreciate you. Thank you for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. And I'd be forever grateful if you would leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to the Onward podcast. Have a great week. Thank you for listening. Let's move onward together.